St. James. Saint Jacques. Santiago. Each of these refers to James the Great, one of the 12 apostles of Jesus, traditionally thought to be the first apostle martyred for his faith. According to the Acts of the Apostles, the 5th book of the New Testament, Herod Agrippa I had James executed by sword in 44 AD. Of this we are quite certain, but of course history, especially as it pertains to the Church, is often a curious mix of fact, tradition, legend, and myth. Christian legend has it that when the known world was divided into missionary zones, the Iberian Peninsula, what would later become Spain, was assigned to James. Documents from the 7th and 8th centuries suggest that he spent a number of years preaching there before returning to Jerusalem and ultimately being put to death. This is where the history of St. James becomes more fanciful. After his martyrdom, popular belief suggests that his body and head were taken by his followers, Athanasius and Theodora, to Java on the Mediterranean coast. A rudderless stone boat was commissioned, and with help from the prevailing winds and a host of angels, James' remains were miraculously transported to Iria Flavia, now Padron on the Galician coast. Here, the local queen, Lupa, provided a team of oxen which Athanasius and Theodoro used to draw James' body to the site of a marble tomb where he was laid to rest. And that was that. If we are to believe the legend, James and his followers lay undisturbed for the next 800 years. Then early in the 9th century, Pelagius, a hermit living in Galicia, saw a field of stars which led him to an ancient tomb containing 3 bodies. He immediately reported this to the local bishop, who declared the remains to be those of Santiago and his 2 followers. The find was in turn reported to the king of Asturias, Alfonso II, who without delay declared Santiago the patron saint of Spain. A small village named Campos de la Stella and a monastery were established on the site. The news of the discovery and the attendant miracles spread quickly throughout the Christian world, and Santiago de Compostela soon became a major pilgrimage site. This was encouraged by both the cathedral authorities, who were anxious to promote Santiago as a pilgrimage destination, and by the monks of the Abbey of Cluny in France, who were anxious to support the Spanish Church in its struggle against the Moors, who were occupying the Iberian Peninsula. Pilgrimages were an essential part of cultural and spiritual life during the Middle Ages. People went on these for a variety of reasons. There were those seeking a plenary indulgence. Some wanted to visit shrines and venerate holy relics. Some traveled on behalf of rich clients who were too busy to go for themselves. Some merely sought respite from the drudgery that was medieval life. El Camino de Santiago, in English, the Way of St. James, refers to any of the pilgrimage routes to the shrine of the Apostle James. The Camino was not a singular route, but rather a web of routes all eventually converging at the Santiago de Compostela Cathedral. Along with the pilgrimage to Jerusalem in the Holy Land, and the pilgrimage to St. Peter's in Rome, the Camino de Santiago was one of the great Christian pilgrimages of the medieval period. As the Camino grew in importance and popularity, a vast network of churches, hospitals, hostels, monasteries, travelers' accommodations, crosses, bridges, and other types of structures was established to accommodate the physical and spiritual needs of the pilgrims. Not coincidentally, much of this infrastructure was also designed to enrich the various towns and cities along the route. The long relationship between the holy and the commercial had begun in earnest. In the 11th century, 500,000 pilgrims a year set forth on their way to Santiago. A truly astonishing number, given that the entire population of Europe at the time was estimated to be about 60 million. By the 12th century, the Camino had become a rather organized affair. Book 5 of the Codex Calixtinus, the Liber Peregrinationis, attributed to the monk Aymeric Picot of Cluny, is widely regarded as the world's first travel guide. Picot accompanied Pope Calixtus on his pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela around 1109, recording his impressions of the journey. The work contains descriptions of the route and the works of art along the way, the local customs of the people who inhabited the towns, and helpful advice for pilgrims. More from Monk Picot later. After reaching its zenith during the Middle Ages, the phenomenon of the pilgrimage ebbed. Several contributing factors have been suggested. At the end of the 16th century, Spain engaged in wars with both England and France, these clashes effectively cutting off access to Spain. The Reformation, initiated by Martin Luther around 1520, had an effect, being critical as it was with the practice of indulgences. 2 centuries later, the Age of Enlightenment did not encourage its rejuvenation. Still, the pilgrimage never quite died out, and in the last century it has actually enjoyed a great resurgence. I stumbled across the Camino. Actually, I rode into a canal. There's a big difference, so give me a moment and I'll explain. My love affair with the bicycle started in the early 80s when I was a young man attending university in Canada. A friend and I decided to set out on a rather ambitious European bicycle tour. It was an era when transatlantic flights were actually enjoyable, unlike the drudgery they've become today. Female flight attendants were impossibly good-looking. Airlines didn't measure their success by applying the bums in seats formula. Passengers had room to stretch out their legs, even if they weren't flying first class. The galley never ran out of the preferred meal choice, and the in-flight bar was always complimentary and open for business. Given that my friend and I were doing the tour on a shoestring budget, we decided that it would be a good idea to keep the joints lubricated while we still had the opportunity. We arrived at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport completely sauced. The Dutch customs authorities, in a moment of questionable judgment, let 2 very drunk young men with bicycles enter their country. In our less than sober state, we carelessly assembled and packed the bikes. My friend in the lead, we headed into Amsterdam following a bicycle path which ran parallel to a lovely Dutch canal. Was my bike poorly balanced, or was I still drunk? It's a moot point. 10 minutes into the trip, I managed to ride into the canal. Thankfully, no photographic evidence of the misadventure survived. Surprisingly, I did. The accident was a harbinger of bad luck to come. After a beautiful ride along the north coast of the Netherlands and a spirited sprint across Belgium and northeastern France, we arrived in Paris, where some SOB pilfered my beautiful Coventry Eagle. Most long-distance cyclists I know have had a bicycle stolen, so in retrospect, I got this aspect of bicycle touring over with early in the game. Fast forward 35 years and I'm once again riding my bike along the canals, over the rolling hills, and through the mountains of Europe. There was a break of many years when, like most other people, I was establishing a career and trying to make a living. But those years are largely behind me. Now I happily spend 2 or 3 months a year in the saddle, navigating the back roads of the continent. Which takes me back to the Camino. Like most North Americans, especially those raised outside of the church, I was unaware of the tradition of religious pilgrimage. My interest was piqued on my early European tours when I kept stumbling into unimaginably beautiful French villages with magnificent churches and historic sites. Many of these sites seem to be linked to the story of St. James. Research unveiled the fascinating story behind the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela. Over the years, I had cycled many of its French sections as part of longer tours, but I had never undertaken a tour specifically focused on the Camino. It was time. The Camino was not a singular route, but rather a network of routes, the peregrination point being the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela. In Book 5 of the Codex Calixtinus, the guide of the medieval pilgrim mentioned earlier, Aymeric Picot refers to the 4 major routes. Four roads meet at Puy-en-Velay in Spain and become one route to Santiago. One road goes through Saint-Gilles-de-Gare, Montpellier, Toulouse, and the Saint-Paul Pass. The next is through Saint-Marie of Le Puy, Saint-Foy of Conques, and Saint-Peter of Moissac. The third road is via Saint-Marie-Magdalene of Vézelay, Saint-Léonard of Limousin, and the town of Périgueux. The last is by Saint-Martin of Tours, Saint-Hilary of Poitiers, Saint-Jean of Angely, Saint-Eutropius of Saintes, and the city of Bordeaux. At Puy-en-Velay in Spain, the roads converge and become one route, the Camino Frances, in English, the French way. Today, most pilgrims think of the Camino Frances as the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, when in fact it is part of a much larger network. After deciding to cycle the Camino, my next task was selecting the route that I would follow. With knowledge gained from previous tours of France, I chose the Le Puy route. This Camino begins in the Puy-en-Velay in southeast France, traveling southwest through France until it reaches the Pyrenean town of Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. Once over the Pyrenees, the route continues westward through Spain until it reaches its ultimate destination of Santiago de Compostela. In total, the trip is about 1,550 kilometers. Prior to getting on my way, I had to answer an important question. Why did the idea of doing this ride appeal to me? Raised in an atheist family, I hadn't set foot in a church until the age of 16, and then it was only to attend the wedding of a friend's sister. After finally making an appearance at a place of worship, I was reprimanded by the priest for resting my feet on the kneelers. An honest mistake, I thought, but he didn't buy the idea that a 16-year-old kid wouldn't know what the kneelers were for. He thought I was just being disrespectful. Religion, obviously, had not figured in my upbringing. I'd read that there was a bit of a hierarchy on the Camino. Walkers apparently looked down on cyclists. Those who did the whole route spurned those who only covered part of it. Pilgrims making the journey under their own steam turned their noses up at those who traveled its length by car. And everyone abhorred the day trippers. From this I surmised there also had to be some sort of religious hierarchy. Would a Catholic look down on a Protestant? Who would have no idea why a Jew would be on the trail? Where would an atheist fit into the pecking order? Lower or higher than a Hindu or, God forbid, a Muslim? Surely my lack of belief had to be superior to a misguided faith. I read the following on a random website. In medieval times, a pilgrimage was said to begin the moment a man crossed the threshold of his front door. He would have been granted permission to leave by his local religious authorities and sworn an oath to remain loyal to his monarch. Dressing in his pilgrim's clothes, he attended Mass, where his staff and script were blessed by the priest. Then he set off on his journey, probably on foot, or perhaps with the aid of a donkey, to the shrine of St. James, hundreds of miles away. A bicycle-riding atheist in spandex shorts, loyal to no monarch, and not a donkey in sight. It didn't look like I would be ticking off many boxes on the traditional pilgrim's checklist. Not a terribly auspicious beginning. Wikipedia to the rescue. As defined by the online encyclopedia, a pilgrimage is a journey or search of moral or spiritual significance. Typically, it is a journey to a shrine or other location of importance to a person's beliefs and faith, although sometimes it can be a metaphorical journey into someone's own beliefs. A metaphorical journey into someone's own beliefs? This last phrase gave me carte blanche to embark on the pilgrimage for any reason whatsoever. In a more serious moment, I came across the writings of Connor Robinson, a man more immersed, learned, and articulate in the idea of an atheist pilgrimage. Among other ideas, he expresses the following. A pilgrimage is a physical or figurative journey in search of an object, place, or state of being that has personal significance and meaning to the traveler, all of which results in a transformation or redefinition of self. Pilgrimage can be atheistic if the object of the search and/or the search itself embodies the perceived ideals of a worldview that denies supernatural creation, interference, and existence. The pilgrim is transformed by the pilgrimage. In many cases, this transformation is itself the object of search. The most appealing part of Connor's writing is the sense that there is a desire in man for transformation and redefinition, and that the very act of movement, be it physical or figurative, provides the impetus for what may be this metamorphosis. Where Connor and I differ is in the idea that the pilgrim should set out with a defined goal informed by an atheistic worldview, rather than leave himself open to a radical recalibration of his worldview, perhaps a religious revelation, should this be the result of the pilgrimage. Which, if this were to happen, of course, would blow the idea of the atheistic pilgrimage totally out of the water. Que sera, sera. I suspect there are as many reasons for walking, riding, or driving the Camino as there are pilgrims on the trail. Whether the reasons are spiritual, historical, engagement in the artistic legacy of Catholicism, or pure sport, it seems to me that all of these are valid in their own way. Suffering seems to be a key component of most pilgrimages. In this respect, the pilgrims of olden days had nothing on me. In medieval times, the pilgrimage began when the individual opened his door and stepped outside. If he resided in Europe, there was a good chance that one of the main arteries of the Camino passed close by. As a modern pilgrim, my initial suffering would be far greater.
Come fly with me, let's fly away. If you can use some exotic booze, there's a bar in far Bombay. Come fly with me, let's fly away.
Vancouver, which I call home, is approximately 8,500 kilometers from Le Puy-en-Velay as the crow flies. Flying on the back of a crow would no doubt be more comfortable than flying on an air transit transatlantic flight. To be fair, I'm a crap flyer. I've never been blessed with the ability to sleep on an airplane. I've actually flown air transit many times thanks to their reasonable fares and their wonderful bike policy. Deflate the tires, take off the pedals, turn the handlebars, put the bike in a plastic bag, say a prayer to the bike gods, and you're good to go. For $30, the good folks at the airline will deliver your bike across the ocean relatively unscathed. And when you arrive at your point of disembarkation, all you have to do is reverse the process and pedal off to a nearby airport hotel for a good nap. This time it would be a bit different. For some reason, there wasn't a bicycle-friendly train from Paris to Le Puy the following day, so the opportunity for a good night's sleep vanished. I had to make a same-day connection. Hastily assembling my bike, I took the metro to Gare de Bercy in order to connect with the southbound intercity train. Six hours after exiting my front door in Vancouver, I arrived totally exhausted at the Ibis Hotel in Le Puy-en-Velay. Confession time. I've been to Le Puy twice before and have found it to be a sensational little town. As luck would have it, I had arrived late on a Friday evening. Before getting on with the serious business of the pilgrimage, it was time to enjoy the terrific Saturday morning market. Established in the Middle Ages through special grants from the overlords, these weekly markets remain a mainstay of the region's economy. Follow the hordes of cart-pushing French shoppers and tourists, and you will soon find yourself in the heart of the action. Most modern pilgrims hope to earn the certificate of completion of the Camino from the Cathedral de Santiago. To earn the certificate, the modern pilgrim must carry with him a créancial or passport, and have this document stamped at various places along the way. The créancial serves as proof that the traveller has walked or cycled the route. In Le Puy, the blank passport is obtained at the Cathédrale Notre-Dame de Puy after the 7 a.m. Pilgrims Mass. A staple of the Camino is the Pilgrims Mass. Held at many of the churches and cathedrals along the way, it's a Mass dedicated to pilgrims undertaking the long journey. Although it's only possible to take communion if you're a Roman Catholic, the Mass is popular with Catholics and non-Catholics alike. The Pilgrims Mass at the Cathédrale Notre-Dame de Puy is particularly popular. It's from this spot that many pilgrims officially begin their journey. After performing the Mass, the priest or bishop introduces the various nationalities, wishes the pilgrims a safe and enlightened journey, directs them to the gift shop to pick up their créancials, and opens the odd mechanical trap doors which summarily disgorge the walkers down the stairs, through the front doors, and out into the great unknown. As it was hundreds of years ago, so it is today, with the exception of those weird mechanical trap doors. The Pilgrim's Way is marked by the scallop shell, a symbol and waymarker which is ubiquitous for the entire length of the trail. For hundreds of years, the scallop shell has been one of the most iconic symbols of the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. There are many legends and myths which attempt to explain the ancient link between it and the Camino. One of the more fanciful legends has it this way. A wedding was taking place as the ship bringing back James' remains from Judea approached the shores of Galicia. The bridegroom was on horseback, and on seeing this mysterious ship approaching, the horse spooked, and the horse and rider were plunged into the sea. Through miraculous intervention, the horse and rider both emerged from the waves, covered in cockle shells. The scallop shell was also thought to be a metaphor, its lines representing the different routes pilgrims traveled from all over the world to the singular point of the tomb of St. James. Because the scallop was native to the coast of Galicia, the shell became a memento, a physical proof of having completed the pilgrimage to Santiago. Scallop shells also had a practical purpose. Medieval pilgrims often wore them attached to their cloaks or hats. More than being just a symbol or a pilgrim badge, the shells were handy and light replacements for bowls. Pilgrims could use them to hold food and drink on the long journey. Pilgrims would be given food at churches and other establishments along the way, and the scallop shell could be used as a measure of the food that would be donated.
Well, today's the day. It's time to leave Le Puy. The weather outside's looking a bit threatening, but I have my trusty pilgrim's passport, my créancial in hand, and it's off on the Camino de Santiago de Compostela.
The Camino from Le Puy to Santiago de Compostela breaks nicely into 4 sections. The Puy-en-Velay to Cahors, Cahors to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Lyon, and finally Lyon to Santiago de Compostela. Rather than following the walking trail, I plan to ride on nearby roads. Although much of the trail is navigable on a mountain bike or heavy touring bike, riders and walkers generally don't mix well. Out of respect to the walking pilgrims, I'll give them a wide berth. Being self-contained, I plan to camp as often as possible. Leaving Le Puy, I immediately plunge into the postcard that is rural France. The initial section of the Camino, or the Chemin de St as it's known in France, is arguably the most varied and beautiful part of the entire journey. It passes through the stunning Allier Gorge to the lovely little town of Saugues, meandering over rolling pasture lands, passing churches and small chapels, both ancient and reconstructed. Leaving the town of Aumont-en-Brac, the woodland comes to an abrupt end, replaced by the wide open spaces of the Margerite. This is cattle country. Eventually, the charming town of Nasmenel comes into view, a logical place to stop for an evening's rest, commiserate with the walkers who have overextended themselves in the first few days of their journey, and enjoy the silhouette of the church's steeple in the evening's sunset. The route then climbs up and over the high pasture lands of the Aubrac Pass, where stunning wildflowers dot the route. I pause for a delicious fruit tart and get my créancial stamped at Chez Jonas in the village of Aubrac. The road then descends into the beautiful Lot River Valley and the town of Saint-Combe-d'Olt, well known for its distinctive crooked steepled church. A trip on the Camino can be a physical challenge, a spiritual journey, or for the photographer or videographer, a study in light. The route is dotted with magnificent churches and cathedrals, many of these built during the Gothic period. During this period, architects discovered and applied new techniques for designing and building structures, using the cruciform plan, pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and flying buttresses. Substantially taller structures were built. Reduced load and stress on the main facades allowed for the installation of increasingly large and complex stained glass windows. The result? Beautifully diffused light bathing the interiors of these places of worship. The atmosphere, the statuary, and the quality of light are inspiring. If you happen to be in the right place at the right time, the results are stunning. No filters used, honestly. After Saint-Combe-d'Olt, the route follows the Lot River downstream. The villages along the Lot, with their medieval half-timbered buildings, Romanesque and Gothic churches, chateaux, and old stone bridges, are simply stunning. Combine the fun of exploring the old towns with the relative ease of pedaling through the river valley, and you have the recipe for a perfect day's cycling. Particularly notable sites along the river include Le Pont-Vieux in Espalion and the Église Saint-Pierre in Besséjoul, a stunning Romanesque church beautifully tucked in the woods. Estaing, with its church, chateau, and old stone bridge, is one of the loveliest villages along the entire Camino. Fancy a quick ride through the town? quick scoot through the Allier Gorge on the D920 leads me to the attractive riverside town of Entraigues-sur-Trière. Another short ride along the Lot and Dordoue rivers, and I arrive at the first major site of the journey, the beautiful medieval village of Conques. In medieval times, Conques was one of the major towns along the Chemin de St. The quaint town, built around the magnificent Abbey Church of Sainte-Foy, continues to draw tourists and pilgrims to this day. A short stroll in the early morning when the cobbled streets are still empty, or in the late afternoon when the setting sun brings out the glorious colours of the stone, gives the visitor a sense of what Conques must have been like in medieval times. And of course a visit to the Abbey Church with its famous carving of the Last Judgment, depicting the harrowing of hell, is a must. "45 kilometers from Conques is Figeac, a substantial town in the Lot department. It's a bustling little place with a lively central square, interesting half-timbered buildings, and an assortment of curbside restaurants. Leaving Figeac, I ride beside the Cele River, passing small villages and a beautiful limestone cliffs. Espagnac and its 2 wooden pèlerins, who seem to have abandoned their pilgrimage, is followed by Marcillac-sur-Cele, home to the Abbey of St. Peter. On a rainy day, the village, once one of the wealthiest ecclesiastical communities in the region, has a rather mournful air about it. Downriver from Marcillac is Cabreret, with its old chateau and striking homes. Many of these homes are built right into the limestone, which in olden days made them impervious to attack. Although the pilgrims of medieval times were principally interested in getting to Santiago de Compostela, there were many exceptional holy places to visit along the way. A cluster of chapel steeples and pale stone houses, clamped to a vertical cliffside above the Alzou River, Rocamadour, was one such place. Pilgrims of yesteryear would deviate from the main route to visit the venerated Black Madonna, reputed to have been carved by Saint Amador. A 2-day detour from Cabreret, Rocamadour is well worth the additional effort, if only to marvel at the stunning beauty of the small village. Back on the main route again, the Cele River reunites with the Lot, and the first part of the Camino concludes with my friend, Mr. Velevant, and I riding into the town of Cahors.